back at the Chinese, does it say bhikshu? What does it say? Tongzi. Well, that's a good... Yeah, so bhikshu, and the reason I caught that is you really technically can't become an ordained monk until you're 19. And so he's only 13, so this is a mistake. So we have, how will we translate that? Novice, maybe. Maybe he's a novice. He can be a novice, which is to take the novitiate vows, but he can't fully ordain. So he's not a bhikshu yet. He's a wannabe bhikshu. He was age 13. He's coming from Yunchuan, and if I understand that right, that's really north. That's in Inner Mongolia, what today we call Inner Mongolia. And you know the Sixth Patriarch is down in the south. So roughly, when the Master says, wise friend, you've come a long way, made a hard journey, he's being literal because that's equivalent of basically walking across the United States from East Coast to West Coast. It's about almost 2,000 miles. So he's arriving with I would say with a certain amount of sincerity. This is not a light undertaking that he did. And especially then and now, to be 13 traveling alone through China is fraught with all kinds of dangers and perils. Not an easy undertaking. He makes it. My guess is he's road weary. He's probably had some experiences along the way. Some of them may be what we today call traumatic. Then they didn't call them traumatic, they just call them interesting. But they were traumatic nonetheless. He might have encountered robbers. Then as now, there were people that would prey upon children in various ways. Not unheard of. And my guess is perhaps if he had money, he didn't have it when he got there. Either because he'd used it all up or as there's an expression, a fool and his money are easily parted. And to be 13 is not to be wise in the ways of the world necessarily. And why I say he might not be wise in the ways of the world is because we know from this and from other sources that he was very, how'd you say it? He was sort of a prodigy. He's very precocious. He knew most of the Chinese classics, the Sushu and much of the Taoist teachings as well, the Tao Te Ching and Zhuangzi. And so you don't learn that by hanging out on the streets. So he probably had some learning, hard travels, and maybe lost his money along the way and sort of probably was a little haggard when he got there. And when he comes in, the first thing the Master says to him, now this is very interesting. Remember, we're kind of taking note at every encounter. What's going on here? Why do some people come in and he says, get some rest, get some food, da-da-da, or you've been gone for so long, good to see you back, or what brings you here, or sometimes more direct. But this young kid comes in, and after he commends him, coming a long way, making a hard journey, he right away says, did you bring the original with you? Now, why does he ask that question? It's very interesting. And then he goes on further, if you have the original, you should know the owner. Can you explain this to me? So right away, he takes this very precocious child and does a real direct challenge, I would say. It's not a friendly question. It's like, so what do you know? You smart kid? Let's see what you know. And he doesn't ask him questions about the classical text. He goes right to the essential nature. He didn't say, well, did you bring your learning with you? Could you recite this passage of text? He said, did you bring the original with you? And Shenhui, it seems as Shenhui, without skipping a beat, says, clinging to nothing is the original, and seeing is the owner. Okay, not bad. Not bad after a 2,000-mile journey and whatnot. And the Master's response isn't to say, really good, great answer, nor does he say, as Hongren said to him, this visitor's a little too sharp, go to the kitchen and start working, others will notice you. Remember, that's what happened. Shenhui himself came in, and the Sixth Patriarch said, well, what are you here for? I just want to become a Buddha. And he said, well, how can you become a Buddha? You're an illiterate from the south. And he says, north, south, east, or west, what does it matter? Everybody has a Buddha nature. Isn't that the truth? And the master said, oh, you're too get out of here, because he sees them as really quite sharp, and it'll provoke jealousy. Somehow he doesn't do that with Shenhui. Now, maybe everybody's thinking, why be jealous of a 13-year-old? Could be that. I'm not sure. But then the master kind of wraps me. He says, what will this Shramanera? So there we have it. Shramanera is, in fact, the term for the novice. This is the Sanskrit that we left in here for a novice monk. I dare to say next. And that isn't a compliment. Dare to say next is not a compliment, meaning what he said ostensibly seems to be pretty cool. I mean, pretty direct according to the other teachings. But somehow when he says it, it's wrong. So what I'm trying to get at here is this teaching doesn't seem to be getting the words right, or even getting the phrasing right, or even being able to repeat profound statements. There has to be some correlation between what you've done in your inner work and then what you say on the outside. And so what the Sixth Patriarch seems to be doing, he's going right into that crack. But without, so Shenhui, I always think this is so much fun to have this as a movie. So who plays Shenhui? How do you represent it? Shenhui has an opportunity here to say, I just got a heads up. What is this Shramanera going to say next? Now, he's thinking like, so that's a cue. I should say something smart next. Not getting the tone of, watch your tongue, young boy, because you really are out on a limb here. So Shenhui either doesn't pick up on that or misreads it as, now we're on to something. I'm going to show him up. So then he turns it, and Shenhui says to the master, well, when you sit in Chan meditation, High Master, do you see or not? Whoa. And the master hit him. So the master takes a stab, whang, 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 3 times. And it's not da, da, da. Social services would have been there if, they do it in this day. But then there, he hits him, and this is waking everybody up. And it probably hit Shenhui up. And now when he hits him, he says to him, when I hit you, does it hurt or not? Now you think, here's strike 2. Shenhui can say, whoa, it hurts, or something. But instead, I can see him in the movie just, it hurts, but doesn't hurt. He's sort of trying to hold it together at this point. And the master says, well, I see and I do not see. And at that point, Shenhui says, how do you see and not see? How do you both see and not see? So there's many things going on here. The original face reference to anybody? What that means? Because we put it in single quotes to indicate to you it's somewhat a technical term. It's not. What other terms are interchangeable with original face that we've seen? What is it referring to? Oh, come on, you can take. Yeah, the essential nature, the Buddha nature. Your spiritual root, what it is before you get lost and confused, that whole and complete. And of course, the owner would be another reference either to the Buddha nature or to that it's inherently whole and complete. You are the owner of it. It's not coming from the outside. So different ways you'd answer that question, but basically it's saying, have you lit up your mind, and do you see your nature? Do you know the ground of awakening? And instead of answering that, he says, well, you didn't like that answer. I'm going to push it back on you. When you sit in Chan, do you see da, da, da? And he goes back and sort of like, probably what the master's saying is, you're a really smart kid. You've studied the classics, and you've been hanging around monasteries, especially maybe Chan monasteries, and you picked up some of the vernacular. Okay, you know some of the expressions, and you watch some of the, because there is an element in the tradition at this time where a master tests disciple with these phrases, what's the sound of one hand clapping? Have you seen your original face? And people sometimes think that this is if you compile all these into a nice little dictionary, then when the time comes, you can come up with the right answer. And there's no right answer. The idea is not to give an intellectual response, but it's to see from the master's point of view whether you've untied the knots, whether you're still seeking anything. So a correct answer, technically in one situation, could be absolutely wrong in another, even though it's the same question, and one gets praised and one gets scolded. Because what is being taught here is not your accumulation of knowledge, or even terms in Buddhism, but whether or not you've been able to use that teaching to transform yourself, whether you have a mark of self anymore. So clearly, there's a wee bit mark of self here with Shenhui, and so it doesn't matter what he says, he's going to come up wrong. He could say what Hui Neng said earlier, and it still would come up wrong because he's saying it with a different motive. So since he's imitating Chan talk, they sometimes in Chinese say a koto Chan, which is ko is a mouth, to is a head, so it's basically intellectual banter. It doesn't go down to the belly. And so he's probably scolding him for that. And what he's saying clearly, or how he's saying it, I think more of the thing is that he's not expressing the original nature. He's expressing something else. What do you get? I mean, just from this here, what would you get that he's manifesting? Now, you could take the question and answers away, and you could see it was very legitimate, proper. But somehow he doesn't pass the test. So why is it that he's not passing the test here? What is he manifesting if it's not the original nature? Anybody? I mean, just what's the vibe, the sort of the tone or the color of this conversation? Arrogance. Perhaps arrogance. Which is not unusual in 13-year-olds. Well, I say this with sympathy because that's an age of uncertainty. That's an age of not knowing who you are. And so sometimes arrogance is actually a compensation for a lack of confidence and security. So it could be that. I mean, gosh, 13, traveling like this, and now he's in this monastery. He's out on a limb, and he might not be as confident as he seems. Or it could be that he really is. He really does think, I'm really smart, because he's been traveling around, and my guess is, given how precocious he is, and given how elders sometimes really like to praise children who are precocious, have them perform and recite and say, oh, have you heard my child? He can recite da-da-da-da-da. And then everybody claps and applause, and it kind of feeds the ego of a child. And so he might have been sort of a little fat. I mean, he's thin from traveling, but he's a little fat in the ego from having had this praise. And probably, my guess is he might be expecting the Sixth Patriarch to do the same that he's gotten all along. Every place he's gone, it's probably somebody says something, he says, well, Confucius said, and he quotes 10 chapters of Confucius, and oh my gosh, what a child, what a wonder. And he comes to the Sixth Patriarch, and he gives this beautiful Chan answer, and the Sixth Patriarch basically says, fart, fart. It's like, and it's like, wow, that was good. That was a really good answer. I've been thinking all the things the Sixth Patriarch say to me when I got there, and here's one of them. And it could be that was one of them. He might have thought in his mind, I'll prepare an answer. What will he ask? And the Sixth Patriarch, knowing his thoughts, went right to him and said, did you bring the original with you? And he said, oh, that's the perfect question I've been thinking you'd ask. And he answers it, and it's like, not. And so now he goes to this next section. The master replied, I constantly see the faults and errors of my own mind. I do not see the rights and wrongs, good or bad, of others. This is my seeing and not seeing. How can you say it both hurts and does not hurt? If it doesn't hurt, then you're unfeeling as wood and stone. But if it does hurt, then you're just an ordinary person who gets angry and resentful. The seeing and not seeing you spoke of as just now are two extremes, and you are hurting and not yet hurting are birth and death. You haven't even recognized your own nature, yet you boldly play around with others. Whoa. So now he delivers another message here. I wouldn't want to spend too much time on the content of this, but rather the character of it. And when he says, I, the master, I only see my faults, I do not see the rights and wrongs, good and bad of others, it seems to me that he's saying, Shenhui, that's where you're stuck. You're looking outside, and you're setting yourself up to be number one. You're pushing yourself up by putting down others. So if you can best others, you can see their faults, you can beat them at debate or something, then you feel as if, and he says, this is right where you're off. This is where your flaw is. And then he kind of does a little logical thing. He says, if you say it hurts, it doesn't hurt, then you're just a piece of wood and stone. So he takes that, and he says, on the other hand, if you say, oh, ouch, it hurts, then you're not who you're pretending to be. You're just an ordinary person. So what's special about you? And so he's trying to dismantle that. And then he says, these are two extremes you're talking about. But then he goes to the heart. He says, really, who was it that came in an earlier, anybody remember one of the earlier encounters, and the person who came in and said, I'm not here to talk and fripple around. The birth and death is one great matter. I'm here to resolve it. Who is that?
Master Yongjia.
Yeah, Yongjia comes in like that. He goes right to the heart of it. He said, I'm not interested in debate. I'm not even interested in getting the robe and bowl. I'm not interested in anything else. I'm born, and I know I'm going to die, and there's this brief interval between, and that's perplexing. That's a source of consternation. And I really want to, within the time I have, to seize these teachings and see if I can make something out of this riddle. He's not beating around the bush. And he's kind of saying, I think, to Shenhui, if you come here, you better come for the one great matter. Because this is not a daycare center. This is not, a gate school where we give merit badges for kids who are smart. We're even at 13. So this is very interesting. He doesn't baby him. He doesn't sort of cater, oh, you're just a kid, go, whatnot. And I think he also, it's a kind of a compliment that he even engages in this with him. Because, sure, he came a long distance. That's not impossible for kids to do. But he does have some deep sincerity. He does have some way mind. And I think the Sixth Patriarch doesn't blow him off, but takes him on seriously as he would a mature disciple. So that's quite interesting. And at this point, and he says, you haven't recognized your own nature, but you boldly sort of play around with others. And that, I think he's talking about this argumentation skill. And this is not unique to this time nor to Buddhism. There is a genre, if you will, in philosophy, probably less so in science, but certainly in philosophy and religion, religious studies of debating. And sometimes a lot of energy and effort goes into learning how to debate and to win a debate and defeat your opponents. For example, there was a great debate in Sri Lanka in the early years between a Christian missionary and a monk, and this debate was publicized widely. It was held in Kandy. And in the Tibetan tradition and so forth, you learn the skills of debate. So the Sixth Patriarch, though, you remember he said earlier, he says these teachings and these Dharma doors are methods of practice. They're not subjects of debate. He's not interested in debate. He's interested, can you take up these teachings and actually transform yourself? Because winning in debate still doesn't resolve the one great matter. And it's like, it's almost a hollow prize. You get the prize, but there's been no inner transformation. And the other thing you're saying, well, so I could defeat somebody else, have I defeated myself? It's not so hard if you're kind of quick in mind and whatnot to win a debate. But that doesn't indicate that you have any goodness, that you have any wisdom, or that you've gotten rid of your bad habits and faults. And it might be that the very wanting to win a debate is the biggest obstacle to answering this question. So he hits on this. There's another text. This is not, again, just Shenhui's situation. We were just reading a text last week. It's called The Water Snake, Simile or Metaphor. And it's part of a double text that has both the parable of the raft in it, which is the second part of it, but the first part is called the water snake simile. And the Buddha's saying if there's someone who wishes, for some reason, and we were discussing the text, why would anyone want to get a poisonous water snake? But the text doesn't explain. You're out there looking for a poisonous, like a water moccasin or something. And so the Buddha says, when you're looking for a poisonous snake for whatever purpose you have, and then one of the students said, well, I'm from Australia, you get those snakes to get the anti-venom. If you don't have the venom, then you can't get rid of when it's like, okay, so you're out there to get anti-venom. Which is an interesting way of looking at Dharma, actually. But, because it counteracts poison. And so the Buddha said, but how would you grab that snake? If you grab it by the tail, it will turn and wrangle and bite you and poison you. So you have to know where to grab and when to grab that snake in order to get the effective use of it. He says, so too with my teaching. You have to discern the right grasp of it. You have to grasp it correctly at the right time in order for it to be effective. If you grasp it in the wrong way, not only will it be useless, but it could be harmful. And so then he points to an example. He says, for example, to grab it in the right way, you have to know what Dharma is for. It's like, wait, what is Dharma for? That's an interesting question. You actually think about it. What is the Dharma for? What is the goal and the intention of the Dharma? And the Buddha is saying here, he gives the answer, of course. It's to win a debate. No. Joking. He says it's for two things. It's for the ending of suffering, dukkha, and for unbinding. Now, we could go into that, but basically a profound liberation. And in the immediate sense, unbinding means letting go. Letting go. Seeing faults, attachments, bad habits, and letting go of them. There's a certain vulnerability. So that's the beginning of unbinding. Ultimate unbinding is the mind that's nowhere attached, everywhere engaged. And so, and the Buddha said, but the mistake many bhikkhus, he says, make is they don't understand what's Dharma for, and they use it to win a debate and argumentation. Now this occurs throughout the text. You see this again and again, both in the Mahayana and the Pali text, this caution that this is not what it's about. And if you have this mind, get rid of it quickly. Because if you lose a debate, it will bring about resentment and envy, and if you win, it'll bring about arrogance and blindedness, because you think, now I'm accomplished. When in fact, it's just an empty prize. And so the Buddha is saying that's not what it's for, and yet many mistake it for this. So there's that warning there about the other thing that's really interesting here too, I think, is the good and bad of others. This comes up again and again in this text. And we're always asking, why is fault finding brought up so much throughout this text as an obstacle or impediment? And I think particularly in this case is that the faulting of others, or looking at good and bad in others, is actually a diversion or distraction from looking at one's own. And now, I want to be clear about this, that the language of this text isn't saying, I don't notice, because he's noticing Shenhui's faults and he's pointing them out, so it's not like he's not noticing the faults. But here, what he's talking about is a fault finding. And fault finding is different than recognizing faults. Fault finding is a predisposition to look for, to search out, to radar like hone in on everybody's shortcomings and faults. It's not like you happen to notice as a friend and you point it out. You're actually scanning for it. You're looking for it diligently, to the point it's almost like your meditation exercise. It's finding others' faults. And this is the Sixth Patriarch's warning about. As a Dharma friend, to help somebody who's got some faults and bad habits at the right time in the right place, you could exchange that with them and it'd be very healthy. But to be constantly looking for it means you're not facing your own, and you're covering over this insecurity or the arrogance. So this is why it's brought up again here, and I think that's what it's referring to here. He's saying, Shenhui, you really haven't brought forth the resolve yet. You're just playing around here. And because you have a quick mind, it's easy for you to find the faults of others, but where's that getting you? So then, Shenhui bows and apologizes. He's thanked the master, and the master continued. If your mind is confused and you do not see, then ask a good and wise advisor to show you the path. If your mind is awakened, then you see your own nature, and so cultivate according to the teaching. You yourself are confused and do not see your own mind. Yet you come asking me if I see mine or not. If I see, I know it myself. How could that be of any help to you in your confusion? Similarly, if you see yourself, it won't get rid of my confusion. So why don't you see and know for yourself instead of asking me whether I see or not? Whoa, this is like, I mean, that's so straight. He's not doing, a kind of eloquent debate here. He's just like boom, 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 hitting the kid. It's really funny because I really love this thing is this, if I see, I know it. How would you know if I see? And how would that be of any help to you? If I said I see, how's that going to help you? On the other hand, if you see yourself, then what are you asking me about? So either way, if you ask me, and I tell you yes, it won't be of any help. What use is it to you in this way? So he's coming in. It's a very pragmatic approach he's using here. But it's just such a beautiful logic. He's just going, if I eat, will you get full? Right? That's kind of what he's saying to him. So now it says, Shenhui bowed again over 100 times. That's a lot. Seeking to be forgiven. Now, I don't know what that meant. Did everybody just sit there? Well, Shenhui, because usually, the usual is 3 bows. If you're really being reverent, it's 9 bows. He goes the extra yard and does 100 bows. And I don't know, here's where the movie people come in. Is everybody just sitting there watching this kid do 100 bows? Is he doing boom, 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 boom? Or is he going down and coming up again? But obviously, this indicates a radical shift in... What's interesting to me, it's not so much that he admits defeat. I don't think that's how you read this. I think what the bows indicate is almost a remorse for his attitude and almost a kind of gratitude to the teacher for pointing this out. So bowing can both be a repentance, but it can also be a form of gratitude. And it can be that simultaneously. And if he's crying here, it could be also out of gratitude for finally having someone call him on his trip. It's really funny. We both want and not want to be called on our trips. It's really, it's hard. And so it has to be just the right person with the right trust or the right situation where they call it. Sometimes a child can call it out. And we're just mortified. Oops, they said the emperor has no clothes, and they're absolutely right. But there's this kind of ambivalence we have of both coming and wanting to be taught and transformed and resisting it at the same time. And sometimes what you see when the tears come or when the bowing comes, the dam has broken. There's a letting go of the resistance at that point and accepting. And in a sense, this could be he's seeing his nature. It's not like there's this dramatic smarting off now. There's silence and he's just bowing. I think you could take that as this is a sign that he's seen something. It's the aha moment in a quiet way. Because even though he came and paid his respects, it said at the beginning, he didn't really. He came with the idea that I want to either get the prize, and if I don't, I'm going to show this teacher up with my smartness. So I got my exit all planned. And then it said he served the master diligently, never leaving his side. So he became the attendant to the master. Now, we would think that this is the end of the story, and it'd be great. But as you know, those of you who worked with 13-year-olds, it's always another day, so let's go on. One day, the master said to the community, I have something with no head or tail, nor name or label, no back or front. Do you know what it is? Shenhui stepped forward and said, it is the root and source of the Buddhas, all Buddhas, my Buddha nature. Try to get you kind of those of you who grew up with the Roadrunner cartoons, this is like meep, and he tries again and doesn't. And so what does the master say here? Now the master could say, wow, great, But it was just another test. And he said, I just told you that it had no name or label, and you immediately go call it the root of all Buddhas. Ah, poor Shenhui. And he says, go build a thatched hut over your head. You're just an intellectual pretending to know. This is a wonderful expression. So, obviously, that isn't a bad answer. Come on, folks, that's a pretty good answer. You know, if somebody came out and asked you that, you'd be pretty happy to come up with that one. But for Shenhui, he can't cash in on it. The master just says, right again, your old fault has come up. The pretending to know, the intellectualizing. And it's not enough. And it's like either nobody answered, because everybody knew from their past experiences, uh-oh, this is a test. So maybe people that knew the answer were saying, I'm not going to say it. And people who didn't know even more said, I'm not going to say anything. But Shenhui, fearless, jumps right into the fray. Either before anybody had a chance, or he might have looked around and said, ha, I got an answer, it's really good. And then he said, go build a thatched hut. What's that a reference for? Get out of the library. Go build a little kuti of sorghum and sit in there with no books, just your mind contemplating your habits and changing. Not, you know, it's sort of, and then the contrast, you're just an intellectual pretending to know. So, after the master passed away, Shenhui went to Jingluo. I think this might be associated with Luoyang. I'm not sure if that's because that was probably the capital during this period, where he propagated the direct teaching of Shaoxi. Shaoxi is the reference to the creek that goes through the patriarchal area where Hui Neng set up his temple. He wrote a treatise, roughly translated, notes revealing the source, which circulated widely in his time, and then he became known as Chan Master. Is it Hezi, right? Hezi. I think Hezi is also referring to a place where he was. So to say something about this a little bit, he's a very controversial figure as he goes on. Nothing's really much said about him as he goes on. We're going to encounter him later in another. It's a wonderful, when the Sixth Patriarch is passing away, and Shenhui has a unique response to that. But some see him as a kind of defender of Hui Neng. In other words, he serves the master, he's his attendant, and he really goes out to protect Hui Neng's reputation, which after Hui Neng's passing gets controversial again. There's this whole debate that continues. Shenhui himself gets royal patronage. Hui Neng pushes that away. You'll see in this next chapter, he's not interested in this one call that's coming up, Imperial Summons. He doesn't really want that for various reasons. Shenhui gets it, but you could interpret Shenhui's activities as he's not going to let that recognition go to Shenhui, even at the risk of, and this was part of his reputation. Others saw him not as so much a defender, but as a rabble-rouser and troublemaker, so that he would go into these areas and challenge the various Chan practitioners. And some even say he challenged them so much, he got so excited, he actually put words into Hui Neng's mouth that Hui Neng didn't speak. Now, you can't imagine Shenhui doing that, could you? So sometimes these habits we have could carry over. I don't know what the verdict is on this. There's been a lot written and studied, and I doubt that there ever be anything definitive on this because the records are sketchy, incomplete from these early records. And actually, even if you think you've got the records, the information you need is not necessarily in the extant records. You know, even here, we got this record, but so much of this depends on our imagination and interpretation to see what's going on here, even though we have the words. You could walk into Luoyang, you could see him being a troublemaker, taking people on, and you might say, good for him, he's really doing the right thing. Or you could say, hey, there you go, fighting again, debating. I don't know until you actually experienced it so reputations, people's reputations, when they're written posthumously by other people, can go from demon to Buddha. Now, that won't happen to anybody else, right? And none of us. It's happening right now. The only thing I would say is I don't have a conclusion on this. I haven't studied it enough, and even if I studied it extensively, I don't know if I could conclude and either praise him or criticize him for what he did. But I must say, to the end, he stirred things up. And to the end, he didn't hesitate to speak up. So which way you want to render this thing, he kept his true colors throughout. But one thing, just to end tonight on, is when everybody comes in to meet the Sixth Patriarch, and my experience with meeting my teacher, there is this experience that everything you bring in, both what you think is not good about you and what you think is really stellar, gets rubbed. What's not really good about you, what's really not good about you, and not just sort of self-deprecation, is gently brought up, sometimes more than gently, for you to deal with. And what you think is stellar, if it really is stellar, it's encouraged in a subtle way to go on, but if it's phony, you get hit. That kind of transformative experience is hard to put into words, but often what happens is you finally meet your match. I don't know if there's any word to say for that. And it's both a wonderful and very hard to swallow experience. What I think is faith in Buddhism isn't so much faith in the abstract Buddha or the teachings, it's this trust that you have when you meet your match to let go and engage in that rubbing. Now for some, where this teacher is not available, it's with your encounter in the teachings and your own practice. That's the advisor you're rubbing up against. But there's no change or there's no awakening without going through this process. Some of the people that came in, you could see they came in with very complex philosophizing. And they were, nuancing terms, very academic in the sense. And that gets whammed by the Sixth Patriarch. Some people come in having memorized text and reciting them, thousands of times. That in itself also is not praised. Now, it isn't to say that none of these are good. He's just simply saying, if you're grabbing that snake in the wrong way, it's biting you and perhaps biting others. Some come in with the traditional understanding of long sitting, hours of sitting unmoving. And that doesn't necessarily get praised. In fact, that comes in for a lot of questioning and criticism. And then some come in like Shenhui, skilled at debate, and that gets down. None of these are not Dharma per se, but it's how they're being used and why you're using them that makes all the difference. So now we come back to Cetana, which is your intention. What is your intention, or what is Dharma for? And if your intention is to become the best person you possibly can and get rid of all the faults and bad habits, and you're willing to face that, then Dharma can work on you and there's some transformation. But if that's not the case, then stress grows. And the more the stress grows, some people then run away and just say, okay, I didn't come to be that deeply transformed. I think I'll just take off for a while. And usually I remember my teacher saying, well, it's okay, the door's open, you can come in or go. Just remember how far you go, you'll never get outside the Dharma realm. Huh? And even if you think you get outside the Dharma realm, you won't get outside your own mind. Huh? And then people go, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, oh, I'm back. I really tried, I couldn't get outside the Dharma realm or my own mind. Oh, good to see you again. Let's say, where do we leave off? Oh, your arrogance. And then you want to run again. It goes on. So I'm just saying, if you are feeling that sort of tension of, wanting to change and grow and feeling that rub at the same time resisting it, you're in the right space. These are the two advisors inside, the good and wise advisor and the not so good and wise advisor, struggling. It's in this struggle that there's enough heat produced to burn away some of those afflictions. So, but I'll share one story with you. Maybe I told you this before. It's a great story. That in the early days of Gold Mountain, we also had a Shenhui. He was 12 or 13, young novice. And man, he was just energetic. Every place you went, he was there. No matter. I mean, you'd find him, if you went to the bathroom, he was in the bathroom. If you went to the kitchen, he was in the kitchen. Someone came with offerings, he would greet him at the door, usher him in the kitchen, go through all the bags, he was there, you can put this here, the peanut butter goes there, da-da-da-da-da. Any guest or anybody knocked on the door, he was the first one to the door. Who are you? Why'd you come? Blah, blah, blah. And anytime there was any questions or a chance, monasteries don't specialize in spotlights, but there is a spotlight. If you've ever been at a session with somebody and somebody says, do you have any questions? You say, I have a question. You always feel this little spotlight coming down on you, and it's like either very uncomfortable or it's like, wow, a little spotlight. So this novice loved the spotlight. So anytime the master would ask a question, he was the first one to jump up with an answer. Nobody even got a chance. And of course, but he really wanted to be praised, and he was smart. I have to admit he's smart. He memorized a lot of text. He always had quick and smart answers. He could baffle newcomers coming in, even professors, because he looked so innocent. And then he specialized in asking, questions like this: did you bring the original with you? And sometimes people take him seriously. Oh, and then he loved it, right? So. One time and the master was always pulling at him, to confront this habit. So one time a scholar came in, a Buddhist study scholar, very well known, and we were all gathered in the kitchen having tea and talking. And he said to the Master Hui, he said, I've been studying the Tripitaka for years, and in one place the Buddha says this, another place the Buddha says this, and I really haven't found a way to reconcile all these contradictions. And then he caught himself, he had seeming contradictions. And so he said, could you tell me, Master Hui, in a nutshell, what's the essence of Buddhism? Right? And so the master, instead of answering, said, I myself is just a bumpkin from Manchuria. I don't know very much, but my disciples here, they're all very learned and smart. And so, so some of us were there saying, uh-oh, we've heard this one before. And we're thinking, those who say don't know, those who know don't say, maybe we can get away with that one. And so the master then turns to everybody and says, everybody has a chance. And he says, well, what do you think? And you say, precepts, without precepts. And he said, no, not the right answer. Turns to you, what do you say? Wisdom. Wisdom is the essence. No. Turns to me and I say, not attachment. He said, no, not the right answer. And we go through all the paramitas, we go through wisdom and so on and so forth. And our little Shenhui is just watching this. He's like, he wanted to say it quickly, but at the same time he wanted to see what everybody else was doing so he could come at the end. And finally he said, enlightenment! That's the essence. And he's like, almost you could see his tail wagging. And the master said, no, that's not it either. He said, what do you mean? That's it? And the scholar's like, who is this kid? And he said, okay, so what is the answer? He had his hands like this looking at Master Hui, because now he was embarrassed. His face was red. Everybody else had given these answers. He came up with his best shot, and so he's going to say, you don't even know. You don't have an answer. You're just playing with us. And so he said, so what's the answer? And the master says, change. He says, where does that say that? That's not one of the paramitas. You just made that up. What do you mean by that? And so the master said, truly, the essence of Buddhism is change. If you're a bad person and you come in here, you have to be a good person. He said, well, what if you're a good person then? He said, well, if you're a good person, then you have to become a sage. He thought for a minute. Okay, but then if you become a sage, right? It's okay. He said, no, if you're a sage, then you have to change and become a bodhisattva. Oh, he's going, He said, well, what if you're a great bodhisattva like Guanyin Bodhisattva? Then, that's the right answer, right? And the master said, no, then you have to become a Buddha. He said, I was going to say that. The essence is to become a Buddha. And the master said, well, you would have been wrong. Well, you just said. He said, I said change. He said, well, if you're a Buddha, that's it, right? You can retire. And the master says, no, you have to change and become a bodhisattva again. oh, and his face is crumpling. He was so upset. And he left the room at that point. He said, "This never ends." And the Master says, "That's the essence." So it was just one of those exchanges I share with you, because we had many moments like this. On the other, we were laughing, but in a sense, there was that little novice inside of each of us, carrying on this debate and enjoying it, but at the same time feeling there but for 10, 15, 20 years go I, or there go I with 10 or 24 years, but I just don't speak it. So anyhow, enough for tonight. Are there some announcements? Shenhui has just returned from his travels to where? Where did you travel?
Hong Kong, China, Hong Kong.
Hong Kong, China, Hong Kong.
Yes, and in China, Hangzhou and Beijing, and Hong Kong and LA. India.
LA.
Yeah, our monastery over there.
Yeah, that's the most foreign country of all.
Yeah, it was a great trip. Yeah.
Good. So you have an announcement?
Yes, so tomorrow we have the lecture, the same time, 7:30. Jin Fosher, the monk from here, will continue his explanation, Infinite Light Sutra. On Sunday, we have one day Amitabha's name recitation, start at 8:30 a.m. to 4:30. And what else? We continued our lectures without any changes. And as I know, we also open up the registration for our summer retreat, Buddhawood Farm in Oregon. And Lak, can you share more details about the retreat? Go ahead. It's one of our organizers who help out to make it happen, this event.
Reverend Humsher would like to relay a message and to invite you to participate in our annual retreat in the forest of Oregon forest. So you will get to sit in meditation in your thatched hut that we were talking about today. Totally unplugged, no cell phone reception whatsoever.
People are in shock. Say that again.
Yeah. You'll be surrounded by thousands of Douglas firs all around you and sleep in the forest with moss as your mattress.
And they're only eating pine needles and spring creeks, right?
Yeah, we're not there yet.
Oh, they'll have real food then.
Yeah, we'll have lots of good food. And there will be at least 4 sits a day. You can meditate. And guess what the topic will be this year? The Sixth Patriarch Sutra. So Reverend Humsher will draw out several key concepts from the Sixth Patriarch Sutra. So if you are interested in learning more about this retreat, visit oregon.berkeleymonastery.org. You have a question there?
I can answer that.
For those of you who have never spent time in nature, which does not include stepping out of the office to have a cigarette, but actually sort of going into the woods or whatnot, it can be a very powerful experience to spend time in the quiet of nature, removed from things. In and of itself, regardless of the Dharma, just to be pulled away from the cell phones and just be close to nature, you can hear yourself in a different way. So, and it's a little spooky sometimes, because at night, when you're sleeping outside, then you imagine things go thunk in the night, and it's because you have seen the abominable snowman up there, right? Isn't that where he lives?
Sasquatch.
What's it? Oh,
Sasquatch.
what's the name?
Sasquatch.
Sasquatch.
Yeah.
Yeah. He comes to the retreat, sits quietly in Chan meditation. Okay.
So
Joking, okay? Jeez.
one upcoming event, actually, the next Saturday, April 21st, we start the bowing repentance session, 10,000 jewel Buddha's repentance, and it's 23 days of bowing, intense bowing. So if you have interest, you can find the information, I think, cttbusa.org. So rare opportunity too is once a year, many people who hold the word coming and practice together for 3 weeks.
Okay, we'll do the transference in English.
Hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in healing unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bowing respect to